Let's get into our study tonight. And so this is still Ask the Pastor. So we've been doing this the past few months. Tonight we got, I'd probably say 3 question and answers. The last 2 kind of tie together, so I fit them together. But the question was asked, and this is a good question. And so I did a little research, and hopefully it'll give some clarification, I guess. The question is asked this: what about circumcision? Is it biblical? Do we do it? Do we not do it? What's the purpose? Is there any kind of purpose? Do we still have a purpose? So you want to flip that on, Dave, and there we go. Sweet. Should we have our male children circumcised? So the first thing you do when you have a question, you go where? You go to God. Yeah, you go to the Bible. Go to God's Word. Okay. So when you're looking for an answer, you have to take both Old and New Testaments as they are, right? And you have to understand context, or you could be deceived. I had some folks, wonderful, great folks, didn't know anything about the Bible, didn't know anything about anything. People gave them the gospel. They believed they were a sinner. They placed their faith and trust in Jesus. And then they're like, yeah, you got to start reading God's Word now. And so, okay, where do you go? Okay, let's start at the beginning. So they went back to the beginning, and they began to see all this stuff. And they're like, wow, we got to go find a church that does sacrifices. And they're like, what in the world? What? No, you don't need to do that. Well, they didn't know, so they went back there. So when you're looking at Old and New Testament, you're trying to get kind of the mind of God and figure out, is this for then, the church, Jesus' time, or now? Or both, or all, or whatever. And so when you go back to the Old Testament, you'll find the first institution of circumcision is back in Genesis 17, 10 through 11. God says, "This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you." What was circumcision for? Last sentence. A covenant sign. Right. You know what a covenant is, right? It's not like a contract. Contract can be what? Broken. Can a covenant be broken? No. If you understand anything about biblical covenants, you go back to Genesis and you'll find out that when God had Abraham take the animal and cut it in half, lay this half on this side and that half on that side, and a covenant, a blood covenant, I should say, was when 2 parties would walk through the blood in a figure 8. And they said, this is our covenant, this is our pact, and we will stick to it. And if one of us fails to do it, may what was done to this animal be done to us. That's how serious the covenant was. Couldn't be broken. It was a blood covenant. So the beauty about that is that God put Abraham to sleep. And God was the only one that passed through the blood. It's a good question. Let's ask the pastor next week. I don't know. I don't know why the figure 8, but I'll have to research it. Do you know?
Infinity sign. It's a sign of infinity.
Infinity times infinity plus 2. Forever and ever. There it is. But some covenants didn't last forever. So anyway. So when you go to the Old Testament, we find it's a covenant sign between God and man and God. And so the idea is that the only time you're going to remember that is when you're using the restroom, right? So this is something special between God's people and Him. Now, if you were a foreigner and you wanted to be a part of God's covenant people, you could come into God's covenant people, and some of them did. But they had to be circumcised as a sign of the covenant to be a part of that covenant community. And so those were important, especially go back to the Old Testament where Jacob's sons, his 12 sons, and then the rape of Dinah. And so then they forced the king or the prince to marry them. They had to circumcise them all. And then I think it was Judah went in and or Reuben or one of them went in and killed them while they were, after they had been circumcised because they couldn't do much. And so they couldn't defend themselves. Anyway, so it was all part of God's covenant community. Now, when we talk about circumcision, this is an Old Testament law, right? Okay, what are the only laws that still apply to us in the New Testament from God, in the Old Testament? You are correct. Love God, love others. But that actually makes up 9 commandments that were given in the Old Testament. I'm minusing one because we no longer do that one. What are the 10 commandments? Somebody give me the 10 commandments. Give them to me. Come on, what's number 1? First 4 deal with God, next 6 deal with man. What's the ones that deal with God? No other gods before him. Hang on, we're just going to God. No, I don't have no other gods. Don't make a graven image. What'd you say? Sabbath? Remember the Sabbath? Do we practice that one today? No. That's why I eliminate number 9, or that one, and we only have 9 commandments. And then the other one was don't blaspheme the name of the Lord. Don't say his name uselessly. Then the next 6 deal with mankind. Don't honor your mother and father. Don't steal. Don't lie. Don't murder. And the last one, don't covet, which Paul says in Colossians, covetousness is idolatry. So it goes right back to the beginning. But Jesus says the greatest commandment is love the Lord your God with everything that's within you. And the second commandment is just like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Love God, love others. That's the whole 10 commandments. Okay, they still apply in the New Testament. Why? Why do the 10 commandments still apply to us? We're not under the law. Not so much covenant as it describes the perfect holy character of God. Jesus said, I have not come to destroy the law, but to what? Fulfill it. What does he say in Ezekiel when he said, I'm going to take out the stony heart and give you a heart of flesh? What does he say about it? What's the verse right after? Everybody forgets that verse. Why don't we remember that verse? God said, there's coming a time when I will put my spirit within you, and I will take out the stony heart, and I will give you a heart of flesh, and I will cause you to obey my commands. That's why. Yeah. Nobody wants to remember that part of it. Nobody wants to remember the obedience. So it's not that Jesus eliminated or God eliminated the 10 commandments. You can't perform them as a sinner. But when you have the Holy Spirit who is given to you, now if you're filled with the Spirit, now you can do that. Now you can not covet, not murder, not commit adultery, not have idolatry, not do those things. So it's not eliminating it, but we don't do circumcision because that was not part of God's holy character. That was a special covenant between God and his chosen nation, Israel, and anybody that wanted to be a part of them. Does that make sense? All right. So then, if it doesn't apply to us today because that's an Old Testament reference to the Jews only, what does the New Testament say? There's 9 verses that deal with circumcision in the New Testament, whether we're to do it or not to do it. I picked this one because I think it's pretty self-explanatory and crystal clear. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 18 through 20. Paul says, was anyone at the time that he was called already circumcised? Well, let him not seek to remove the marks of circumcision. Was anyone at the time of his calling uncircumcised? Well, let him not seek circumcision. For neither circumcision counts for anything, nor uncircumcision, but keeping the commandments of God. Each one should remain in the condition in which he was called. So there you have the idea that Paul says whether you're circumcised or not circumcised, it doesn't matter. Okay, so circumcision, is it a biblical issue? No, not New Testament. Not in the New Testament from that moment forward. Yes, no, it's not an issue. So does the Bible say we should get circumcised or not circumcised? No. Paul says it doesn't matter. Not an issue. It is what it is. And the ladies are like going, yeah, this doesn't apply to us. Let's go to the next question. But it could be important because this might... Absolutely. So, when we talk about if it's not a biblical issue, then it's going to become one of two issues. Number one is parents, because Egypt, she just had a little boy. She's going to decide whether she's going to have him circumcised or not. Or, if you become an adult male, then it'll be your decision whether you want to go back and have it done or not. Those are the two cases, and it's your decision to do. Now, it becomes a personal issue with the parents to begin with, or then the individual male when he gets older. So, number one, you got to figure this out. What are you going to look for? Number one, circumcision has been around for thousands of years. It's been one of the oldest medical procedures for thousands of years that have happened around the world. So this is not something that's very new. Second, it's not a medically necessary procedure. It's not medically necessary. Say again? They experiment with it?
That's when people get circumcised babies, they take the skin sometimes and they've done experiments and stuff with it.
Yes, that's good. Some parents have done it for social, cultural, and religious ideologies. For us as Christians, there's no biblical context for circumcision or uncircumcision. Not a big deal either way. But there are some medical benefits and some medical negatives to circumcision. Some of the benefits are preventing bacteria from getting trapped, lowering the risk of infections, even though some doctors disagree with that. So now you've got some doctors agree, some doctors don't. The risk, it reduces the risk of cancer, penile cancer, by 48%, lowers the risk of sexually transmitted diseases. I didn't get how this is an uncomfortable topic, so I didn't want to get into all that stuff and figure out why it does that. But all of the statistics that I'm giving you, I think I got 5 or 6 different medical cited articles that I was reading. They all say the same thing. And so it does reduce the risk. The only thing that differs is the statistics. Lowers the risk of sexually transmitted infections, especially HIV, by 72%. Now, over the past 4 years, they've done a huge study in Africa, and this is where they've gotten most of their statistics. But it has reduced in 72% and all around the world. Reduces the risk of urinary tract infections, and there's a bunch of other. We don't need to get into those. Some of the negative effects is it causes excessive bleeding at the initial surgery, or it could cause scarring, which shortens the urinary tract, make it hard to go to the bathroom. And so there are some complications that would come of it. But the positives outweigh the negatives. And so, but like anything, it's a personal decision between the parents or the individual. This was, and I'll give you the sites if you want to look this information up. You can have it yourself. The Urology Associates Medical Group, the Mayo Clinic, HealthyChildren.org, Cleveland Clinic, Men's Health Magazine, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. Those are just the number of the ones that I've gotten it from. Now, this next portion might deal with this, so I'll give you this. That raises the question, somebody would say, well, if it's not medically necessary, why did God create it for us? Well, it is medically necessary while inside the womb. And all of those studies and research show that it's medically necessary to protect for certain infections and child development and growth and all this other stuff while he's in the womb. But once he is developed and once he is born, that's a totally different story. Unless he's born premature. If he's a premature baby, then it has to stay on for a certain amount of time. So there's all kinds of crazy stuff. Now, around the world, America, Korea, and the Middle East. And the Middle East, I'm going to say, is Israel. Those are the countries where 78% of the population are circumcised. Every other country besides those three, only 30% of the population are circumcised. So it's a huge difference. Kind of weird, but... That's personal choice. It's irrelevant. No biblical context. I don't think either way it's good or bad. So that's just up to you. So thought I'd throw that in there. Okay, so talking about being medically necessary, why did God create it, do all this thing? The next question was, why did God create vestigial organs if they're not needed? Why did God create parts of our body that aren't needed? And so back in 1890, I think there was 189 different vestigial organs and things that evolution said was created but no longer needed. Like wisdom teeth. Why do we always have our wisdom teeth pulled? Oh, you don't need those things. Why do you take your tonsils out? Oh, because you don't need those things. Why do you take the appendix out? Matt just has appendix out. Ah, you don't need that thing. Take the gallbladder out too while you're in there. You don't need that thing. So if you don't need all these organs, why did God create all this stuff, right? And so that's the next question. Why did God create vestigial organs if we don't need them? Well, let's look at definitions. Number one, vestige is derived from the Latin word vestigium. It means footprint. That just kind of, it's an evolutionary term. That's why they use it this way, because it tells you where you come from. It tells you your footprint. Does that make sense? So when we talk about vestigial, the Webster's Dictionary defines biological vestige as an organ that is small, it's degenerate, it's imperfectly developed in comparison to a more fully developed or an earlier stage of an individual or past generation or something closely related. So it's defined as a vestigial organ is more evolutionary in definition than creation. They believe that a vestigial organ that is created is no longer needed, and so that's proof of evolution. But it's actually not. And so they believed, according to the Darwinian model, 100 and some, like I said, back in 1890, 100 and some of these organs was vestigial. But the more and more we get more information, the more and more we find out, yeah, that's an important piece. Yeah, that's important. Yeah, that's important. Yeah, that's important. I think that number has come down to 30. They have reduced that number quite a bit because the more information we have, the more they realize that these things are important. But the body can deal without them. That becomes the issue. And so as we have more and more knowledge, we find out more and more information. Things function the way they should. Like evolutionists may concede that the tailbone, or what's called the coccyx. Why is it called the coccyx? Is because it looks like the cuckoo beak. That's scientific right there. So they named it the coccyx because it looks like the cuckoo's beak. That's how you got the tailbone. That's a scientific word. I was like, wow, anybody could have done that. That's not real cool. But anyway, according to evolutionists, the tailbone, many of the medical professions have taken that evolutionary speculation that they could remove that because it's no longer necessary because they believe it started as a tail. That our ancestors used it as a tail. And so it's not medically necessary now because, well, we don't have tails, right? Anybody have a tail? There is actually an abnormal deformity where in some children there's a little tail-like vestige that comes out, and it's on the outside of the skin. It looks like a little, and it wags and stuff too, and all that. And yeah, it's real weird looking. But that's a totally different thing. That's not attached to the tailbone. So when we talk about the tailbone, when you look at that scientifically, it functions. Well, we'll just say if you didn't have a tailbone, you wouldn't be able to poop. And it would be a lot worse than, or maybe it's you can't hold it back. I forget which that is. Well, yeah, either or would be bad. I'm sorry. But most of your organs would go right down into your legs because you'd have nowhere to hold them. So what happens is there's 6 different muscles and 6 different, they're muscles. And they all attach to the coccyx. And what it does is it creates what's called a pelvic diaphragm. You know, you have a diaphragm around all your organs, right? That's why if you have hernias and stuff, they wait till the very last minute because they do not want to go through the diaphragm. They don't want to interrupt any of that stuff unless it's absolutely necessary to go through that. The same thing is with the pelvic diaphragm because it holds, what does it hold? Oh, the bladder, the uterus, the prostate, the stuff down there by the bum, and all of those things. And without that pelvic diaphragm, all of those things would not be able to function properly. It has a vital importance to our lives. And without that, we wouldn't be able to function. It's not a tail. It's an attachment piece. You have to have that or you can't. Well, there's other things. But what happens is that evolutionists and atheists, they use circular reasoning. It's the most logical flaw that they can use in a vestigial organ is they say that it's evidence for evolution. And it becomes circular, like this. Evolutionists will declare that vestigial organs are a result of evolution because they're no longer needed back then. And then they turn around and they argue that the existence of these organs today are proof for evolution. That's like saying there was a gold bar right here, but we no longer need it, so it's gone, but we still have it. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't. They're saying we don't need that no more. It was originally, so we don't need it, so it's gone. Oh, but wait, it's still here. But we still don't need it. So it's a circular. Actually, that type of reasoning wouldn't even hold up in court. But anyway, so the coccyx, very important bone, tailbone, looks like a cuckoo beak. So there you go. There's some real information for you today. The appendix. Darwin said the appendix was a useless organ. This was something that wasn't needed. Life science for evolution says the appendix is a vestigial organ left behind by plant-eating ancestors. In the middle of the 20th century, surgeons often removed the appendix electively during abdominal surgery, assuming that it had no function at all. The important point in the presence or absence of an appendix doesn't reveal any evolutionary pattern whatsoever. Just because you can survive without an organ doesn't mean that it's evidence for evolution. You know that? I mean, but they want to point that out. It's kind of useless. There's a lot of animals that don't have appendixes. Invertebrates, amphibians, reptiles, birds, all of them have no appendix. You look at the wombat, marsupials, rabbits. They have some, but dogs, cats, and horses don't. Both Old World and New World monkeys, they don't have an appendix, but anthropoid apes and mankind do. Now, the problem with this is this. Once we found out that it does have an important aspect to the body, because it takes bacteria and it helps the intestinal organs flush out contaminants. And without the appendix, we still have other things that help do that too. And the important point is just because something was created in the past and may not be no longer needed today, doesn't give rise of evolution. We just don't know its function originally. Does that make sense? You can't know some of those things. Just because something was originally created like this, and now we have a corrupt, fallen creation, doesn't mean that everything we see today is how it was back in the Garden of Eden. Does that make sense to you? Yes, Cody.
I was going to say, I didn't know this, but I was learning about this the other day. I didn't know a person could live with only one kidney.
Yeah, absolutely. They sure can, and many of them do. Some people donate a kidney to a family member or some other loved one. Let me explain what I mean. In Genesis 2, 10 through 14, this is the Garden of Eden. and I've shortened it just to show you the 4 rivers. A river flowed out of the Garden of Eden to water the garden, and there it divided and became 4 rivers. The name of the first one is Pishon. The name of the second river is the Gihon. And the name of the third river is the Tigris, and it flows east of Assyria. And the 4th river is the river Euphrates. Now, my question to you is this. Here's a map of the Middle East. Here's the Euphrates. Here's the Tigris. Not really sure. Somewhere over here, they think it's the Gihon. Over here, the Pishon. Up here, east of Assyria, right here. So the Tigris is east of Assyria. So where would you think that Eden is? So I could ask you the question. Is the Garden of Eden in America? Is the Garden of Eden in Europe? Okay. Is the Garden of Eden right here? Or was it right here for certain when God created it?
Well, if it's there, then why don't we have to fill it up?
Okay, so it would be up here then. Is that what you're postulating? Okay, so let's go with Zelma's postulation. So if it's flowing down into here, then these 4 rivers come from one up here that watered the garden, so the garden would be up there. Do you agree with that?
Doesn't have to be, because it depends upon where it is on the equator as to which way the water will flow, north or south,
Okay,
because water flows towards the equator.
and this is the point that I'm trying to make. Is everything right here exactly the same as it was in the Garden of Eden? Why? Why has it changed? The flood. Absolutely. Because of the flood, none of this stuff that we see here was originally part of the creation. Why do I say that? Why do I say that? Because of the evidence we have today. So when the waters, so you go back to Genesis 7 and you'll find out that the rain didn't flood the earth. The earth broke forth and the waters gushed upward. And so most of the water come from below. And that's the beauty of it, because science has found out that nowadays there's enough water, I believe it's somewhere like 430 to 470 miles below the crust of the earth. There's a layer of water that literally, if it come up on top of the earth, it would flood the earth above the mountaintops. Do we have enough water to flood? Sure do. Don't need the rain for, it's ridiculous. But this is not going to be the same, because when that water receded and all of those dead things in the land and everything began to settle, it created a new topography. So everything from the original is not what it looks like. And I use this because this is, oh, dagnubbit. Maybe you can or can't see it, I don't know. This is Oregon. This back here is Mount St. Helens, erupted in 1980? 1980. Yeah, something like that. This was the topography. Nothing but forest down through here. Nothing but forest. As far as the eye could see through the mountain. When it erupted, it created such, man, all the gases that come out. This is one for global warming. And I'm not advocating, because climate change might be good. It might be getting hotter. I don't know. Tribulation says that the people roasted because of the heat, and so God may be building it up for the tribulation. I don't know. Don't care. It's not up to me. He's in control of it. It's irrelevant. The amount of atmosphere that come out of Mount St. Helens was, gosh, I forget how many Celsius. But it was equivalent to 1,635 degrees Fahrenheit. That erupted into Canada and through all parts of America, and the dust and the particles and the heat and all the stuff. But it created a mud slurry. of all the steam and all the water and all the stuff that come out of there. It created a mud slurry that went through all this forest, ripped every one of them. You probably can't see this right here, no. But in this picture, and you can look this up and find it, there's all these trees that have been ripped out of the ground that are laying over on their side. All of the branches and all of the pine needles and everything have been ripped off of it. It's just like a telephone pole. And all of them are just laying down there because of what has happened. Now, this topography here, here, and here is what was left over. It's called, the new topography is called the mini Grand Canyon. Because it looks just like the Grand Canyon with this little river that goes down through it. And it's 1/4 the size of the Grand Canyon. I mean, you have rock layers that are, and it took 5 days for this to be completed. And you've got 200 feet walls that have rock layers that are billions of years old that happened in 5 days. So it's amazing. All of this in 5 days. And so what happened was, when you look at pictures pre-1980, you see this big, beautiful forest with all these trees. And you look at it after the eruption, and all you see is this big Grand Canyon with nothing but desert wasteland. So my point is, don't look at the present and say, this is how the past happened. That's not how it goes. So just because we have vestigial organs or things that don't actually are not actually needed, doesn't mean that something in the past didn't do that. Now, remember they said the appendix was for vegetation from one of our past ancestors? Maybe there was something in the Garden of Eden because everybody was a plant eater, right? Maybe there was a special plant that the appendix helped digest. And since the flood and since the corruption of mankind, maybe we don't need it because we don't have those plants no more. Does that make sense? We don't have all the information. Deuteronomy 29:29. Put that to memory. The secret things belong to the Lord. But what he has revealed to us, that's what we're responsible for. It's irrelevant. Doesn't prove evolution. Doesn't prove creation. Just proves that we don't need those. And it's not a case for either. Like I said, it's just irrelevant. But don't look at the past or the present and say this is how the past happened, because it may not be the way that it was. Okay. This one is very curious because it goes along with vestigial organs and it goes along with something that's really cool. And I thought I'd throw this in there so we've got enough time left so I can really spend on it. Talk about things that are not needed. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 13 to 14, this is the curse on women, men, and the serpent. And so when you look at this, God told the serpent, because you have done this, you are cursed more than all the cattle and more than every beast of the field. On your belly shall you go, and you'll eat the dust all the days of your life. And they look at that and they go, oh, that's just figurative. That was Satan, and so God just gave Satan some figurative, that's figurative. So why is it figurative for the serpent, but it's literal for Adam and Eve? Right? What was the curse of Adam and Eve? Let's go to the woman. What was her curse? Pain in childbearing. What else? She would desire to rule when God now says man is in charge. What was the curse of the man? Have to work. But what would happen during his work? Because he worked in the garden before the curse. Sweaty toil. There you go. What is the result of the vegetation from the curse? Thorns and thistles and all that stuff is a result. So when all this stuff is cursed and it's a physical result, we see the effects of it today. Why doesn't he have a physical effect? This is really cool. I love this one. So let's talk about eating the dust. So we talk about God uses earthly things to give definition or metaphorical stuff to people. In Micah 7:16 and 17, it's talking about nations that are going to cower back to him for fear. It says, the nations shall see and be ashamed of all their might. They shall put their hand over their mouth. Their ears shall be deaf. They shall lick the dust like a serpent. They shall crawl from their holes like snakes of the earth, and they shall be afraid of the Lord our God, and shall fear because of you. And so this is literally talking about the nations that were going to come crawling back to God. And he uses the serpent as an illustration. Now, if you ever see a serpent, he's got that big forked tongue, right? Comes out and it flicks down in there. This is what's funny, because they found out that their tongues lick the ground. They lick the ground and they pull up the dust, and those dust particles go back to a specific organ that's inside of their mouth, and it samples that dust, and there's special receptors in those organs that track mice, frogs, but yes. So they have the heat sensors and all that in there where they can tell if there's something alive ahead of them. But when they tell the dust, they can track which way it's going. And that's how they do. They got to eat the dust so that they can tell where it's at and where it's going. So in a figurative, well, a literal and figurative way, snakes eat the dust. That's crazy, isn't it? Scientific facts. Now, this one's the big one. This is what blew my mind. So, when we talk about, you know what DNA is, right? Basically, just a quick basic information. DNA stores information. So, when you have two parents, the DNA that they have, when they have a child, it tells whether that child's going to have blonde hair, blue eyes, brown eyes, whether it's going to be a boy, a girl, whatever, and the DNA can be mixed. DNA does not create new information. DNA stores information. This is why DNA disproves evolution, because it's one of those cases you will never produce an elephant's eye, a giraffe's eye, a bird's eye. You will never produce any kind of cow's leg because the DNA you store doesn't create new information. It just stores what's already there. Now, you can lose information, which means, you'll begin to lose. So if your family begins to have, you have blue-eyed and brown-eyed people, and then you just have a bunch of brown-eyed people, you can begin to lose the DNA that has blue eyes. And so all of your offspring will be brown eyes. Not an issue. Are you following me? Am I making sense? I don't want to lose you on this, because this is a big one. This is what has happened with snakes. And I've gone to... dang it, I forgot to write them down. So there were 4 different scientific, secular, atheist, scientific, evolutionary websites that I went to find this information. And it's talking about snakes that have lost DNA information inside of their body, but they still have not given up their vestigial organ. Or I should say in this part, vestigial limbs. Because there are certain snakes today that they still have the DNA information in them to have legs and arms. But because of I'll probably mess this up because I'm a biblicist, not a medical dude. mRNA or RNA, something of that nature, forbids them from developing. And so science is like, oh, well, these guys used to walk on feet and they had hands and arms and all this stuff. And they used to walk around, crawl on all fours or maybe 2 or whatever, and they'd stand upright or they could have. But the DNA is in them. They have the stored DNA information. But the mRNA or the RNA, one of those, forbids them from actually developing. And they never develop. That's something to think about. Does that prove God's creation and curse? I would say so, but all I can go by is what they're doing. It doesn't necessarily prove God cursed the serpents, but it does give more reliability to the Bible than it does to evolution. Now, you can find this, and this is a beauty. I love this little guy. This is a long snake. And you can see up here the head, and these are his front legs right here. And these are the back legs back here, and here's the tail. But this is an actual snake fossilized. I think they said it was like 80 billion years ago, whatever, don't care. Is this a, yeah, here you go. So here's a bigger picture of it blown up. Here's the back feet. And what they say is that these guys literally had these legs and these arms up front, but some of those serpents or some of those snakes, the mRNA forbids them from developing, but they still have it in their DNA. It's still there, but it forbids them from developing. Here's a record of it. Look like a snake, right? And this is what I think is funny, because if you take this is why, and I don't want to get into fire-breathing dragons and stuff. You can do your own research on that. But when people document this stuff from history, and then you find out that it's actually possible that it could have been done, because the Bible talks about Leviathan in Job, right? He breathed fire, and he was a water creature. Lived down at the bottom, but he could still breathe fire. So are fire-breathing animals? Sure, it's possible. So when these people documented thousands of years ago that they live with fire-breathing serpents, I believe it's possible. And so when you talk about a fire-breathing dragon, if you look at China, especially this year, 2024 is, what's the year of the dragon, I think. That's what it is. So is this the right one? Yes. Look at that. This is the 2024 New Year calendar, year of the dragon. You take these arms away and you take these legs away. Does that look like a snake? Isn't that crazy? Absolutely crazy that it would line up and match up with what was actually documented. Now, there are some fossil records of snakes that have legs only with no arms. The arms never developed. And then, of course, all the snakes that we have today don't have any legs. It's very curious. And this one's just a fanciful picture if you like cartoons from Disney. This is Kung Fu Panda 3. This is where he goes to the spirit realm. And in the spirit realm, he gets his chi, which is a fire-breathing serpent. And it's got this huge, long body with a big, long tail. And right here is his claws, these little arms that's up by the head. I think, yeah, there's another picture of it. And so he's got these little arms up here and this big long body and little... Why can't that not be this guy here? Why can this not be the serpent that God cursed from the garden? There's more evidence to back up creation than evolution. And just because we have organs and things and we don't need our wisdom teeth, maybe those plants back in the day originally, you need an extra set of teeth to munch on them things. We don't know. Have no clue. But it doesn't prove or disprove anything. So don't let people mistake you. So there's the deal on vestigial organs. Here's something to give you some cool evidence on the serpent. It is darn sure possible that God actually cursed him, and we do have more evidence for that than evolution. And circumcision, that's your own personal choice. Any final thoughts or questions? Sweet. I just had, yes, Pam.
Where was that fossil found?
This fossil, I don't remember. Yeah, I took that from a movie. No, just look that up. Look up fossilized snake with legs. It'll bring you to this picture, and it'll tell you where. It wasn't in America. I think it was in Europe somewhere. Huh? China. No, it actually wasn't in China. It was in a different place. So here's a question for you. Were kangaroos in the Middle East?
Yes.
Why do you say yes?
Because they found their bones and stuff and fossils and stuff in the Middle East of kangaroos.
Well, that's crazy. How'd they get there? They stepped off the ark. They had to come off the ark. Now, It's different topography. Mount Ararat may not be the same Mount Ararat as what was originally, because just like every state has a Springfield, right? Springfield, Missouri, Springfield, Ohio, Springfield, Georgia, Springfield. Which one's the original? Which one's the... So we really don't know. So you can't do modern to put in the past.